Hey there, welcome to this Koala sampler tutorial episode, and today we are diving in to the brand new mixer functionality that has been added to Koala in the latest update. Now there are a couple of other little things, but I've got another tips and tricks video coming, so I'm going to save those. I really just want to look at the mixer today, and also I'm a little bit late to the party because I've been away from YouTube for over a month due to moving apartment, no internet, a whole bunch of reasons, but I'm kind of back now. And I want to get back into it. It's also why my view is a little bit different because I'm in a new apartment, a new studio room. I've got some new equipment to share with you guys, loads of stuff. But for today, I'm just kind of makeshifting this, got my camera set up as best as I can. Mic's kind of okay, just to get this video out so that I'm not too late with this update. Anyway, let's take a look at it because it's really, really exciting. If we go to our tabs here, this little drop down burger icon as they call them, you can go to settings here. Make sure we're on the extras tab, and I want to just make sure that you're looking at 1.4080. That is the last update that we've had for Koala that introduced this really cool mixer view, mixer functionality. Now, a couple of other things just very quickly. I don't want to dive into them too deep, but there are some now advanced quantization options. You can turn those off and on. And if we just nip over to sequence here, open this up, it's in here if you're looking for them. We've got live quantize. I'm going to do separate videos on these and go into them a little bit further. But for now, just know that that's been added. And a couple of other little tweaks here and there. But the mixer is the big one. Now, it's a paid update, but don't worry about that. It's only £5. The guy that makes this is kind of like a one-man band from what I understand. I don't know him personally. I've got no reason to sort of vouch for him. However, I know that he works really hard on doing this. And it seems like this update was a massive one. To ask for a small amount of money for it, I think is completely fair. Saw a few people on the Facebook groups moaning about it. Please don't do that. I think these independent creators are giving us these amazing products. It's not a big team. It's not going to Roland or Akai or whatever. So put your hand in your pocket. Do the right thing. Get yourself updated. And what you'll notice is once you are updated, on the samples page, it's all the same as it ever was. Sequencing is the same. But when we come to performance, we can now see this mixer view. If you can't, it's because it's not open. You'll see we've got mixer here. You can see just about see the white writing. If you've got a white background skin, it might cause you problems, so give that some thought. But as we click this, it disappears and we're back to the typical performance page with our performance effects inside of here. And if we notice at the very bottom right, that's where that little mixer tab jumps to. You open it up and it's here. So that's how we access the mixer view. To start off, we've got 4 audio channels, 4 mixer channels. Typical DAW kind of stuff that we're getting here. But again, just to touch on something very quickly, another criticism I saw quite early on after this amazing thing was released was that we've only got 4 channels and a main output channel as well, so 5 technically. You don't need more than 4. Sure, you can have 16, 64, whatever people think they need to have it in here. I promise you 4 is enough. If you're smart enough, you understand resampling, which I'm going to talk about and go through all of that as we talk, I demonstrate this. You don't need more than this. I always feel it's so unfair that when these creators do these things, particularly with independence, they're giving you their kind of heart and soul and it's met with, oh, well, why can't we have and why can't we have? Koala Sampler isn't a DAW. I don't think it's intended to be a DAW, and I don't really think it should be. I think the more complex you make it, the less fun it becomes. I think this is important to have, and I'm going to talk about all the great reasons to have a mixer. But do we need 64 channels worth and to be having to scroll through and do all of this stuff? I really don't think so. So, just my personal opinion, of course. I just want to, really support the guy for doing a great job with Koala here. And I hate seeing all the negativity as soon as something's released. So, we've got our channels. Now, typically, all audio that comes from our samples, if we look at a typical project, very standard workflow for Koala. You can, of course, just work on the pads and loop things and do performances and stuff. But for me, I put in my samples. I put those samples into sequences. So in this case, I've got like a 4-bar example loop with some audio chops and a bunch of drums. Really simple stuff. But that's kind of how it works. And then from there, I would record that out and, do whatever I want to get it ready for the world. Now, the great big thing about the performance, or the mixer even, is that you can now get a lot closer to having a finished track. In fact, you can make a finished track. You always could inside of Koala, because you can now sequence these in a really good way. And we've always had the option to play with audio volume. So let's say this sample here, I could always adjust the volume of it. But now we have these visual meters inside of our mixer. We can see headroom levels. We can see just general dB levels, and we can mix things and we can do all of that. It really makes this more of a one-stop shop. At one point, I was taking a lot of the outputs, putting it, opening this as like third party into ORM, and then separating all the audio out so that I could kind of get closer to this. You can do it all inside of the box now. Sure, with ORM, you can have more channels and you can do other things. But again, I think you're overcooking it, particularly if you're a sample head like me. I don't need 1,000 tracks. I just need what I need to work with. And this is really cool. So when we used to adjust our volume, you had some idea here of the level, because we've got a little dB kind of, meter telling us what we're doing. But it wouldn't tell you if you were clipping the master channel, because we had no way of seeing the master channel before. There was no way of seeing what's coming out here. So because I always gear these for beginners, I want you to understand the workflow here and everything, how this kind of mixer works. If you're seasoned and you know DAWs and you know all of this kind of stuff, you can skip forward a bit and see what else if you're just looking at what the features are. But I want to talk about the workflow and how this moves. So typically with our samples, we've got our samples for our project. We've created a sequence. And if we go now over here and I play you this sequence, just watch where the audio level comes through here on our main output channel. And you can see I can control the volume of that output channel. And I can see visually with these like EQ meters here, I can see them coming up and down. And I can check if I'm clipping, whether I've got, a certain amount of headroom. So even if this was the only thing that was added, I would have been really happy as an update, because that is the main thing. Not being able to see your output level has a big impact when you're trying to master a track a little bit, get something ready to be sent out into the world. Having this now inside of Koala is just, so cool, really cool. Now, what we also have here are the 4 channels, and you'll notice as it stands as, kind of like a default, all of the audio goes to the main master channel. Now, even if we start separating things out and we want to put them into these separate audio channels, which we're going to do in a second, it's still ultimately chaining its way through and coming out through the master output. Just some basic stuff if you're unfamiliar with how that works. So when we've got our samples here, that's generally what's happening. So what we want to do is we want to separate things off. Now, why do you want to do that? Because, of course, you could argue that, if my kick drum is here, hi-hat, a snare, I just want to adjust the volumes of those. Why don't I just do it here? Well, you can. Of course you can. That's a way to balance it, and you can do it by ear. But what we can do now is we can apply individual effects to pads and separate things out, which is really, really cool. So I'm going to do it as a kind of practical demonstration because I think it's easier to show that way. And I've done a couple of things to sort of set up, and I'll talk about them as we go through. The first one here is that when you open this up, generally, you'll notice it says bus D here. And when I open this by default, if you've just downloaded this update, you're going to see bus A, B, C, and D. But what you can do, of course, is you can come in and rename them. So when I'm thinking about my sequence and my little track and what I want to build here, I just want to think about what I want to separate out because I want to apply effects to those individual elements. So I decided that I want to have a drums channel. So I renamed this one as drums. I wanted to keep my snare separate because I want to put a different effect onto the snare. So I can do that here. So I kept that separate. The same with my chops. And bus D I'm not currently using because I don't want to overcomplicate this. I also wanted to leave one label just as it, opens up. Now when we go to the samples, we can send our samples to those particular buses. And you do that by going to whatever sample you have selected. We can do edit. And what we have now is a tab called mix. Now we've still got our sample tab, so we can do all of our editing of that sample, the one shot, reverse, etc. But what we can do now is we can go into mix, It was once called the EQ tab, I believe, and we still have our EQ here. We can enable it, we can reset it, we can play around with it, whatever we want to do. But this tab has now been added. And you'll notice it says main here because without changing anything, everything is going to the main output. That's why it says main there. Now, I don't believe you can change the main output. I think that stays the same, but that's fine. So everything is now going to the main output. I've got a kick drum here and a hi-hat that I'd like to send to my drums channel. So I pick this one and then I choose it. Now, if I hadn't have renamed those, you would see bus A, B, C, and D. But because I've renamed them, now says drums, so I can send them to the drums and to the drums. Now the snare drum I want to keep separate, so I'm going to choose that one and send that to the snare channel. And then all of my audio chops here, I'm going to send those to the chops group, or the chops channel if you like. So we'll do exactly the same thing, choose this one. Now, one thing I'd like to see introduced here as a sort of update in the future, and I think it probably will come, is that in one of the more recent updates, we could also hold edit and grab multiple pads, select those, and then if we change the pitch or the volume or whatever it is we do, we affect all of those samples at exactly the same time. And it would be nice if you could do that here so that I could grab all of these and then, you know, send them to a particular channel. But you'll notice that the mix becomes kind of grayed out here. There's no way to access that mix tab at this point, or, you know, where we're going to send them to. So unfortunately at the moment, that's not a, you know, that's not a function that's available. So we'll come out of that. You have to still kind of set these manually. It's not the end of the world, but that would be a nice update to see. Now let's go to perform here. Take a look at the mixer again. And what we can do now is just play the sample again, play this loop, and just watch where the audio is coming through here now. So you can see we have full independent control of those elements now, and I can, you know, mute and solo and do all the typical DAW stuff that you would get with like mixer channels. Now again, why would you want to do that if you can adjust your volume and stuff in here, and I can pan and pitch and I can still use my mutes and everything else here? Well, that is because what we get is a whole bunch of new effects, and that's a really big part of this update. So when we come out of Mixer View, we've always had some really great performance effects, and you can scroll through all of those and play around with them. And they are kind of performance effects. That's how I would use them. So a lot of the time I want to record out my track, and as it's playing through and I'm recording, I want to use the filter and stutter it a little bit, put some glitches in and do a whole bunch of stuff and record that output. And before, as a workaround, if I wanted to add a little reverb to something, I would say solo my snare drum and add a little reverb here, use hold, and then I would resample that down so that my snare drum then had that, you know, reverb applied to it. Nice and simple stuff. What's great now is that on top of all of those performance effects, they stay there, they're kind of independent. We now have all of these other effects. And what you'll notice are these 5 little slots that we have here. And when we click one of these, it gives us this great effects list. And you'll notice that there's already a lot of effects in here, stuff that you haven't seen before, like a proper sidechain, which for the sample heads, the, you know, the beat makers, a really, you know, good sidechain is what we've been looking for ages. The ability to sidechain as well, even. So if we click sidechain, we can now set what we want to sidechain to. So in this case, when I've got it set up, I could sidechain my snare to my drums, to my chops, whatever I want to do. Really, really good stuff. And the other big thing is that with these effects, aside from being a pretty big comprehensive list, there's also more of those to come, by the way. I saw that on the Facebook group from the developer himself. He said there's more effects that are going to be added to this in future updates. So keep an eye out for that. What we have are the controls for these effects now. So with our performance effects, Changing the sliders changes a parameter, or, you know, probably a few parameters at the same time, but you don't really have any information about what you're changing. You can hear it on something like the stutter because it will stutter by quarter notes, 16ths, 1/64, whatever. You can do all of that kind of stuff. But with these new mixer effects, we can really dive in and play around with those because each effect has its own parameters, as you can see here. So I can play with the sidechain, threshold, release, output, whole bunch of stuff. And every single one of these effects has the ability to change like more parameters, set stuff up. We can also A/B test nice and easily now. So if you're not familiar with A/B testing, let's say you've got your drums, you want to apply some compression and you just want to hear what difference that is making. You apply that effect, and just using this off and on button here, I can listen to the difference between one or the other, which is a really handy feature. We can also just close them out. You can also bypass them by holding them here and just dragging it down and getting rid of that effect, just bypassing it for now. If you want to delete them, you can drag them up and just put them into the bin like you can with your samples. And of course, we can stack up to 5 effects on every, every channel here, including your main output channel. And in terms of kind of maneuverability, we can drag them around. So let's say we want to try something over here. You can play with the chain because, of course, it's still like a mastering chain. It still has a flow. So whether you want to compress something before limiting it or whatever, you know, however you want to do that, you can change the flow of these effects, which is really handy. You can drag multiple to the bin as well. But it's really cool that you can just kind of drag and drop them wherever you want them. The other cool thing about having these slots and having them on the master channel is, again, when you want to make a beat from start to finish, the ability now to come in and, you know, still add effects if I want. I want to add a little warbly effect to my main output. Let's say I want to start doing some mastering though. I could EQ, and then I could add a compressor, and then add like a limiter. So you're really starting to get some like proper master chain effects in here. And unlike the performance effects, you can still resample all of this, and I'll talk about that again in a moment. But with these kind of performance effects, you'd have to kind of resample those in order to kind of bake them to an effect. And once you did that, it was kind of permanent. It's not really an undoing thing. Now we can just apply the effects to whatever we want. And of course, we can just delete them. So we can listen to them, we can swap them out, we can play around, try different, different chains, different effects. Really, really good stuff. It does still allow you to resample. So when it comes to limitations, and let's say you're one of the people that, you know, isn't very happy that there's only 4 channels here, you just have to think more outside of the box in terms of how you resample and how you use that. So let's say, actually with my drums, I wanted to separate all of my drums out. I've only got 4 channels, so yeah, okay, I'm limited a little bit in terms of I could probably have a kick, a snare, whatever it is. Hi-hat and say ride cymbal or something like that. I can then come in and I can apply effects to each of those individual elements. You know, I want to put a little filter on my kick drum. I want to add a little, I don't know, reverb to my snare drum here. I can do all of that. And then what I would do is I can still resample this. So I would set all my drums up, get the volumes tweaked so that they're perfect, sounds really good, all the effects are in there. And then I would simply resample all of those drums back down to one pad. And then that pad, again, could be sent out to one of the channels. It could just go to the main output. But once it's back onto a channel again, I could then add more effects and layer and gritty up and do it again and resample. Or just free up all of the space to give me more room to keep putting things onto these channels. So don't think of it as limitations. Just think of it more as, I suppose, a way of layering samples and putting things together. So if you want to add things on an individual pad basis, right down to your individual kick drums, snare drums, whatever it is, you can do all of that. But be aware that you might want to then resample that and then do it again to free up each of these slots, because there are only 4 of them going to the main output. Keep that in mind. I think that's a really good workflow tip. But yeah, I think generally, other than that, I think that pretty much covers it with the mixer. As I said, you can set these back to 0 dB if you want to just double tap on them. We have the ability to solo and mute. And of course, you can send your samples all the way through. I've got other things to talk about in the next episode. I've got another tips and tricks video coming for Koala Sampler. There's a few things I've learned myself that came with a couple of the updates, and also just things that I've learned from other users online that I'd like to share with you. So I'll do that very shortly. Hope you've enjoyed yourself, and I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Take care.